I'm Phil Portlock, and I'm a native Washingtonian born in Washington, D.C. on July 12, 1941. And my time I was born near at Garfield Hospital, and that was near Washington's DuPont Circle. And just a typical childhood. Had friends, got in a little fun trouble sometimes, but I would say I was an average student at the time. And when I was 8 years old, I started playing sports. And I can really say at this time in my life, when I look back, I see how important participating in baseball and football, baseball primarily, how that really helped me develop. It gave me an opportunity to understand what teamwork was all about, and we had a very good baseball team, and so I decided to just choose baseball as my sport. That was my primary sport, and I played that from the time I was 8 years old until college, and actually ended up being drafted by the Pittsburgh Pirates. And I decided not to do that because I decided that photography, I fell in love with photography many years later, but my first exposure to the camera was when I was in I would have to say in the 10th grade. Decided around the time that I was, say, about 17, 18, I started being pulled back to photography. And by 1967, I was able to get my first, what I call good camera. And it was a Honeywell Pentax camera. And that was a camera, I got it in 1967. And the world just opened up for me because I saw the great potential of the field of photography. And before I got the cameras, I couldn't really afford a lens. So we had the cameras that you had the single lens reflex, but they had lenses that would go with the camera. I was able to get the body first, the body of the camera, and it took me about a year to save up the money to get the lens. During that time, I started reading magazines like the Ebony magazine, Life magazine. I even started going to museums because I saw the photography being so similar to art. And going to the museums helped me to appreciate composition and also lighting on my subject. So when I finally got that lens, I had a complete, my system was completed. I had a camera and a lens. And believe me, I use the expression now, I shot everything that moved. That was my goal. Animals, nature, sports. And I knew by 1967, late 1967, I knew that photography was something that I wanted to just devote myself to, even where a profession was concerned. And I got word that Dr. King was coming to the nation's capital to give a sermon at the National Cathedral, and that was up on Wisconsin Avenue in Washington, D.C. And I was able to go to the cathedral on Sunday, March the 31st, 1968, to hear him give a sermon entitled Remaining Awoke During a Great Revolution. 5 days later, Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, and his death had a profound effect on my life in two ways. I was angry, sad, and just really beyond sadness that this man who had given so much of his life to peace and justice and equality would be shot dead in Memphis, Tennessee. or shot dead anywhere, but it happened to be in Memphis, Tennessee on April the 4th of 1968. And I was very touched by his death. And then I realized I wasn't the only one, because there were many of my neighbors and many citizens in Washington, D.C. and around the country. And I'm speaking mainly black citizens. I'm not saying that there weren't any white citizens that didn't care about Dr. King. Many did, because he spoke primarily about the welfare of blacks, but he was concerning all the American citizens. He wanted us to be able to live a fruitful life with equality for everyone. And so in 1975, I joined the staff, and my goal to become a full-time photographer became a reality when I was hired by the Metro, which is the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, better known as Metro, hired me as one of their staff photographers. And my job was to go out and photograph all of the construction of the Metro rail system. So my first 5 years at Metro was documenting all of the stations being built. I flew in helicopters to show the landscape, because we had to decide where the train rails were and what routes would make up Metro. So in order to do that, they needed photographs taken of the areas, but it could only be done in the winter when there were no trees or leaves on the trees, and we were able to see the clear ground and see the terrain. When we were planning which streets or the route of the rail system before any tracks were laid, we had to know where the tracks were going to go, and we would have to photograph those areas from a helicopter, and it had to be done in the cold of winter. Secondly, we couldn't have any doors on the helicopter, so we were sitting inside the helicopter, and we would have a belt, and the only thing holding that belt together was a piece of masking tape. So we would be flying up in the helicopter, and I had to get used to that. But when it was explained to me by my supervisor, who was a former Navy pilot, and he explained to me, he said, "Phil, the reason we don't want all of this strap and harness around you, if for whatever reason the helicopter malfunctions and it drops down in a body of water, soft terrain, or went in a shallow body of water, and we were still conscious, all we would have to do is snatch that piece of masking tape and hopefully give ourselves a chance to escape." And that was a challenge for me, but my wife and I have had an opportunity, Pat Sloan, we've been able to travel the world. And as we've traveled to Africa, to the Far East, Thailand, China, Japan, South Africa, Senegal, we have been able to come back. Once we returned home, we didn't just let the pictures and sit around. We would sit down, and I would do research and do the writing, and my wife, Pat, would do the voiceover. Her voice is on all of our narrations, and we have found that to be an opportunity to not keep the information that we gather to ourselves, but to share that with the community. Yes, with the Voting Rights: A Struggle to Be Counted, is actually a protest film. And in 2013, in February of that year, the Supreme Court decided to take a case entitled Shelby County versus Holder. Shelby County was in Alabama, and Holder was Eric Holder. Eric Holder, President Obama's Attorney General at the time. The case that came to the court, and the court decided to hear it. In February of that year, I went down and was a part of maybe 1,000 other people down in front of the court when the case Shelby versus Holder voting rights case was decided to, the court was deciding to have oral arguments. Before a court makes a decision, they take time to meet and argue over what should be the result of this case that they had taken. Well, February of that year was a time that the court decided to have arguments. And I was there, and along with John Lewis and many other, Jesse Jackson, Sheila Jackson Lee, many of our noted African American citizens and leaders were there because it was a powerful case. 3 months later, on June the 25th of 2013, the Supreme Court decided to do away or declare no longer needed two clauses in that case. One was Section 4B, which identified cities and states that had adopted voter laws that restricted or impeded or denied blacks the right to vote. Section 5 was the clause that said if a jurisdiction or a city wanted to enact some of these laws, discriminatory laws, they would have to come before a federal court or the Justice Department to get approval. When the court decided that this no longer needed to be done, then this left all of these jurisdictions who wanted to prevent African Americans and people of color from voting. The court decision made that okay for them to do that. And as a result, millions of not just African Americans, but millions of Americans who were eligible to vote have had their votes denied or impacted in a very negative way. I came home with Pat and we sat down, and our choice of weapons was my photography, my writing, my skill at putting clips together, and to create a historical piece that would trace the long and brutal struggle by African Americans to gain the right to vote. That was the choice of weapons that we used to produce this film, Voting Rights, The Struggle to Be Counted. And since that time, we must have reached over 20,000 people over the country in these last years, in these last 12 years or so. And we're doing it to this very day. And that is to educate not only African Americans, but the whole public that this whole thing of denying people the right to vote is taking their voice, which is the only thing they have available to elect people to positions that will make decisions that will affect every part of their lives. And when that's taken away, then what other thing do you have? And so that's why that's why that film has been such a big thing for me over these years. Yes, I have a copy. There's a copy of a older version of the voting rights film on YouTube. Yeah, and then I give people the link. And I think right now, I put it on last year. I think there are about close to 500 people that have viewed it. But I've added now John Lewis to the updated version, which is only 3 minutes, additional 3 minutes at the beginning, because of how much of his life he dedicated to what they call good trouble And part of that good trouble was voting rights. And some of the last issues he dealt with before he died was the Voting Rights Act. So I think it's appropriate, it makes me feel better to have this film lead off with a series of pictures of him that I was able to take of him over the years.